The Bell Witch, America's most terrifying haunting. The voice in the dark. There are sounds that don't belong to this world, sounds that crawl beneath your skin and nest there, whispering that the barrier between life and death is thinner than you ever dared imagine. In the autumn of 1817, in the remote farmlands of Robertson County, Tennessee, the Bell family heard such a sound for the first time, a scratching at their bedroom window, slow and deliberate, like fingernails dragging across glass. When John Bell Sr. threw open the shutters with his rifle raised, there was nothing there, only darkness, only silence, only the feeling of being watched by something that had all the time in the world. He should have left that night, they all should have, but the Bells were good Christian folk, prosperous landowners in the newly formed community of Red River, just outside what would become Adams, Tennessee. John Bell had carved his 320-acre farm from the wilderness with his own hands, raised a family of 9 children, and earned the respect of every neighbor for miles. Men like John Bell didn't run from shadows. They didn't believe in ghosts or witchcraft or the old superstitions that clung to the Tennessee hills like morning fog. Not yet. The awakening. The scratching came again the next night, and the night after that. Each time, John Bell would investigate, lantern held high, his hunting dog bristling and whimpering at his side. Each time, he found nothing, but something was different now in the Bell home. Something had shifted in the air itself, as if the house were holding its breath. It started small, as evil often does. The children, Betsy, Richard, Joel, Esther, Zadok, Elizabeth, Jesse, Drury, and John Jr., began complaining of strange sensations in their beds. They felt their blankets being tugged away in the night. They heard whispers in the walls, footsteps in empty rooms, the sound of chains being dragged across wooden floors. Lucy Bell, John's wife, tried to calm them with prayers and warm milk, but she herself had begun to notice things. Chairs would rock by themselves, doors would slam with no wind to move them, and sometimes, in the corner of her eye, she would see something, a shadow that moved against the light, watching her as she worked. By December of 1817, the entity, whatever it was, had grown bolder. It no longer confined itself to scratching and whispers. Now it could strike. Betsy Bell was the first to feel its full wrath. She woke one winter morning with red welts across her face, as if she'd been slapped repeatedly by invisible hands. Her screams brought the entire family running. As they gathered around her bed, they watched in horror as the marks appeared in real time, one after another, angry red handprints materializing on her pale skin, while she sobbed and thrashed, fighting against something they couldn't see. "It's touching me," she shrieked. "Make it stop. Make it stop." But they couldn't, because you cannot fight what you cannot see. You cannot reason with what refuses to show its face. And the entity terrorizing the Bell family was just beginning to reveal what it was capable of. For months, the Bell family suffered in silence. In the early 19th century, to speak of hauntings and supernatural attacks was to invite ridicule, or worse, accusations of insanity or demonic possession. John Bell was a respected member of the Red River Baptist Church, a man whose word carried weight in the community. To admit that his home was under siege by an invisible force would destroy everything he'd built. But by the spring of 1818, the attacks had escalated beyond anything they could hide. The entity was no longer content with physical manifestations. Now, it wanted to be heard. It began with faint whispers, barely audible over the crackling of the fireplace. Then humming, old hymns sung in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. John Jr., the eldest son, was the first to hear it speak clearly. He was alone in the barn, milking the cows before dawn, when a woman's voice spoke directly behind him. "Good morning, John." He spun around, the milk pail clattering to the floor. The barn was empty, But the voice came again, this time with a laugh, low and mocking. "Did I frighten you?" The entity could talk, and worse, it knew their names. Desperate and terrified, John Bell finally broke his silence. He confided in James Johnston, a neighbour and fellow church member, describing the torments his family had endured. Johnston, rather than dismissing the claims, was intrigued. He'd heard similar tales from the old country, stories of poltergeists and vengeful spirits. He agreed to visit the Bell home and witness the phenomena for himself. What Johnston experienced that night would convince him, and eventually an entire region, that something genuinely evil had taken residence in the Bell household. As the family gathered in the main room after supper, the manifestations began. Knocking sounds echoed through the walls, following a rhythm that seemed almost musical. Objects levitated, a Bible, a candlestick, a child's doll, floating through the air before crashing to the floor. And then, clear as church bells, the voice spoke. "I am a spirit. I was once very happy, but have been disturbed." James Johnston's blood ran cold. The voice was female, sharp and articulate. With an accent he couldn't quite place, it seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What do you want?" The response came with a crackle of malicious glee. "I am here to torment old Jack Bell." Old Jack, a nickname only John Bell's closest friends and family used. Whatever this thing was, it knew him, it had chosen him, and it had no intention of leaving. The curse takes hold. Throughout 1818 and into 1819, the Bell Witch, as it came to be known, transformed from a frightening mystery into a regional legend. Word spread quickly through Robertson County and beyond. At first, neighbours came out of concern. Then they came out of curiosity. Eventually, they came simply because they didn't believe it, and they wanted to see the charlatan family exposed. One visitor asked where it had acquired such knowledge. The response chilled everyone present. "I am everywhere. I see everything. I know your every thought, your every sin. There is nowhere you can hide from me." But it reserved its cruelest torments for the Bell family themselves, particularly John Bell and his daughter Betsy. John began to suffer mysterious ailments. His tongue would swell, making it impossible for him to eat or speak. The swelling would last for days, then vanish as suddenly as it appeared, only to return without warning. Doctors were baffled. Nothing in their medical knowledge could explain the affliction. Betsy's suffering was different, but no less horrific. The entity seemed fixated on controlling every aspect of her life. It would attack her in front of guests, slapping her face until it bled, pulling her hair with such force that witnesses could see her head jerking backward. It would throw her across rooms and pin her to walls. "She's mine," the voice would hiss during these attacks. "She will never escape me, never." The family tried everything. They brought in ministers to perform exorcisms. They held prayer vigils that lasted through the night. They consulted doctors, folk healers, and anyone who claimed knowledge of the supernatural. Nothing worked. If anything, the attacks intensified, with each failed attempt to stop them. Lucy Bell, driven to the edge of sanity watching her daughter and husband suffer, finally confronted the entity directly one evening in November of 1819. "Why?" she demanded, tears streaming down her face. "Why are you doing this? What has my family done to deserve such cruelty?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, quietly, almost gently, the voice responded, "I am here because of what John Bell has done. Ask him about Kate Batts. Ask him about the land. Ask him what he stole." The witch's identity. Kate Batts. The name hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Everyone in Red River knew Kate Batts, or Old Kate, as she was called behind her back. She was an eccentric woman, known for her sharp tongue and fierce temper. Years earlier, she and John Bell had been involved in a bitter land dispute. Bell had purchased a portion of land from Batts, but she later claimed he'd cheated her in the transaction. paying far less than what was agreed. The community church had sided with Bell, but Kate Batts had never accepted the ruling. Some said she'd cursed him, others said she'd sworn revenge, most dismissed it as the ravings of an unbalanced woman. But now that old dispute took on sinister new meaning. Was the entity haunting the Bells truly the spirit of Kate Batts? Was this her revenge, manifesting from beyond the veil of death? Or worse, projected through some form of witchcraft while she still lived? The entity itself gave conflicting answers. Sometimes it claimed to be Kate Batts's witch. Other times, it insisted it was the spirit of an early settler whose grave had been disturbed. On certain nights, it would claim to be multiple entities, a cacophony of voices arguing among themselves, creating such chaos that the Bell family would flee their own home and sleep in the barn. By 1820, the legend of the Bell Witch had spread beyond Tennessee's borders. Stories were printed in newspapers as far away as Philadelphia and Boston. The remote Bell Farm had become the most famous haunted location in America, a title it would hold for decades to come. Among those who heard the tales was General Andrew Jackson, the hero of the Battle of New Orleans and future President of the United States. Jackson, whose estate, the Hermitage, was located not far from the Bell property, was intrigued by the accounts. He'd faced down British armies and Creek warriors without flinching, but the idea of an invisible witch that could hold an entire family hostage fascinated him. In the summer of 1820, Jackson assembled a small party of men, including a self-proclaimed witch-layer, who boasted he could destroy any spirit with his silver bullets, and set out for the Bell Farm to investigate the phenomenon personally. According to accounts that have been passed down through generations, Jackson's wagon suddenly stopped on the road leading to the Bell house. The horses strained and pulled, but the wheels wouldn't budge, as if locked in place by invisible chains. The men examined everything, the wheels, the axles, the harness, but could find no mechanical reason for the stoppage. Then they heard it. A woman's voice, cackling with delight. "All right, General. Let the wagon move. I will see you again tonight." The wagon immediately lurched forward. Jackson, to his credit, laughed at the audacity of the spirit and continued to the Bell home. But according to the stories, the witch-layer, who'd come to destroy the spirit, fled in terror that very night after the entity tormented him so severely that he begged Jackson to let him leave. The general himself reportedly said afterward that he'd rather fight the entire British army than deal with the Bell Witch. Whether every detail of Jackson's visit is true remains debated by historians, but what's certain is that by 1820, the Bell Witch was no longer just a local haunting. It had become a national sensation, and those who witnessed its power firsthand never forgot what they'd experienced. The death of John Bell. As 1820 turned to 1821, John Bell's health deteriorated rapidly. The mysterious swelling of his tongue became more frequent and severe. He developed seizures. He lost weight and strength, aging years in mere months. The entity made no secret of its intentions. "I will torment old Jack Bell until he dies," it announced to anyone who would listen. "I will dance on his grave. I will sing at his funeral. He will not escape me." The family watched helplessly as their patriarch withered before their eyes. Lucy Bell tended to him day and night, but whatever afflicted him was beyond any medicine or prayer. The local doctor confessed he'd never seen anything like it, as if John Bell were being slowly poisoned, but by something that left no trace. On the morning of December 20th, 1821, John Bell Jr. found his father unconscious in bed, barely breathing. On the nightstand sat a small vial containing a dark, smoky liquid that no one recognized. When John Jr. showed it to his mother and siblings, the witch's voice filled the room, triumphant and gleeful. "I gave old Jack a dose of that last night, which fixed him." True to its word, the entity celebrated. As the family and neighbors gathered for the wake, the voice sang loudly and joyously, reciting a crude drinking song completely inappropriate for a funeral. Mourners reported hearing laughter echoing through the house as John Bell's body lay in the parlor. Some claimed they saw his coffin rocking slightly, as if something invisible were dancing around it. At the burial service at the Red River Baptist Church Cemetery, witnesses swore they heard the witch singing hymns, but with the words changed to mock the deceased. It was the most disturbing funeral Robertson County had ever witnessed. John Bell was dead. The witch had won. The departure and the promise. After John Bell's death, the attacks on the family ceased almost immediately. Betsy found herself suddenly free from the violent assaults that had tormented her for 4 years. The voices stopped. The objects remained still. The house, for the first time since 1817, felt like a home again. But the witch wasn't quite finished. In early 1821, just a few months after John Bell's burial, the entity spoke one final time to the assembled Bell family. Its voice was clear and strong, lacking the malice that had characterized it for so long. I am going now. I will be gone for 7 years, but I will return. The family asked where it was going and why. The response was cryptic. I have business elsewhere. But this family and this land will never be free of me. 7 years, and I will return. With that pronouncement, the manifestations stopped entirely. The Bell Witch vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared, leaving behind a family shattered by 4 years of supernatural terror and a community forever changed by what they'd witnessed. The Bells tried to rebuild their lives. Lucy remained on the farm with her younger children. Betsy eventually married, though not to Joshua Gardner, her childhood sweetheart, whom the witch had forbidden her from marrying, threatening unspeakable consequences if she disobeyed. The entity's control over her life extended even beyond its physical presence. She married Richard Powell instead, a local man who'd been a frequent visitor during the haunting. By all accounts, they had a quiet, if not particularly happy marriage. And then, in 1828, exactly 7 years after its departure, it returned. The manifestations were brief this time, lasting only a few weeks. The entity spoke primarily to John Bell Jr., now managing the family farm. It was almost conversational, lacking the violent rage that had defined its earlier presence. It discussed religion and philosophy, offered predictions about the future, and spoke of events happening far away that were later confirmed to be true. Then, just as suddenly as it had returned, it left again. But this time, its final words were even more disturbing. I will return in 107 years. The year the witch prophesied for its return would have been 1935. According to local legend, strange occurrences did indeed plague the Bell property and surrounding area during that time. Unexplained lights, disembodied voices, objects moving on their own, but nothing approached the intensity of the original haunting. Perhaps the witch kept its promise and found the modern world less to its liking, or perhaps it's still there, waiting and watching, biding its time. The Bell Witch Cave, located on the former Bell property, remains one of Tennessee's most famous haunted locations. Thousands visit each year, drawn by the legend. Many report strange experiences, feelings of being watched, unexplained cold spots, whispers in the darkness. The cave, which John Bell's family used for storage, is said to be where the entity first emerged from the earth itself, a doorway between worlds that was opened and never properly closed. The original Bell farmhouse no longer stands, but the land remembers. Adams, Tennessee, the small town that grew up around the location, embraces its dark history. The legend has been documented in countless books, academic papers, and investigations. It's been featured in films and television shows. The Bell Witch is Tennessee's most famous ghost story and one of the most well-documented hauntings in American history. But what truly happened in Robertson County between 1817 and 1821? Was it really the vengeful spirit of Kate Batts enacting supernatural revenge for a land dispute? Was it a poltergeist feeding off the emotional energy of a family in turmoil? Was it something far older and darker, an ancient presence that existed in those Tennessee hills long before settlers arrived, occasionally reaching out to torment the living? Or was it exactly what it claimed to be? A witch, pure and simple, one who chose John Bell as her victim and destroyed him with methodical, patient malice. We'll never know the complete truth. The witnesses are long dead. The original farmhouse turned to dust. The direct evidence lost to time. What remains are the accounts, dozens of them, from credible witnesses, from skeptics who became believers, from families whose ancestors swore to the reality of what they experienced. And what remains is the feeling you get when you stand on that land today, the sense that something is still there, beneath the soil, in the shadows between the trees, watching and waiting. The Bell Witch may have come and gone, keeping to its mysterious schedule, but something lingers in Adams, Tennessee, something that whispers in the wind and scratches at windows on autumn nights. The locals will tell you, the witch never really left. She just got quieter. She learned patience. And every so often, when conditions are right, when the veil between worlds grows thin, she reminds people that she's still there, still watching, still waiting, and perhaps still looking for her next victim. Epilogue. A warning. If you ever find yourself driving through Robertson County, Tennessee, on an autumn night when fog rolls through the hills and darkness comes early, you might be tempted to visit the Bell Witch Cave. You might want to walk the land where America's most famous haunting took place to see if you can feel something of what the Bell family experienced 2 centuries ago. Before you do, remember this: the Bell family didn't seek out the supernatural. They didn't conduct seances or dabble in the occult. They were ordinary people living ordinary lives when something chose them, something that watched them first, learned their secrets, and then revealed itself with methodical cruelty. And it promised to return. So if you hear scratching at your window tonight, if you notice shadows moving against the light, if you hear your name whispered by a voice you don't recognize, remember the bells. Remember John, who died slowly under its curse. Remember Betsy, who bore its attacks for years. Remember Lucy, who watched helplessly as her family was torn apart by something she couldn't fight and couldn't understand. And remember that some legends survive because they're warnings, not just stories. The Bell Witch was real. The witnesses were real. The terror was real. And somewhere in the Tennessee hills, in the darkness beneath the earth, something that was never quite human and never quite ghost is still there, still watching, still hungry, still waiting for the scratching at your window to begin. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe below and we'll see you next time.